Alright guys, how's it going? A few months ago I had a fruitful discussion with some Intel people about some pretty far future products. It was interesting not only for the product information that I received, but also for the manufacturing info, some of which I'll indulge you with today. Now, for the privilege of this information, there was a condition placed on me. I couldn't mention any of this stuff until at least part of it was outed elsewhere. They just wanted a bit of distance between our discussion and my review. Last week though, when a poster over at AnandTech Forums reposted a deleted Reddit post from a user called Moore's Law is not dead, the leak of the Arrow Lake codename released me from my promise. And now I can give you the details that I've been sitting on. Before that though, let me just say that the Arrow Lake part that I know about, ArrowLake-p, is clearly not the same part as this one that was mentioned in the Reddit post. The Reddit poster clearly had information on the desktop part, as it mentions an 832 config, so that's 8 big cores, 32 little cores, and as we can see for the high-end enthusiast products. And they also noted that it might achieve parity with AMD offerings at the time, but it will lose out to Apple in power efficiency. I mean, to be blunt, they just don't know that. That's just making assumptions. I mean, it's a pretty solid assumption, but still, there's no way that they can actually know that for a product which is, as you can see, 4th quarter 23. But this last part will become pretty interesting soon, as you'll see. And so now, on with my information on ArrowLake-p, which is, of course, a mobile part. It goes without saying that far future products are subject to changes, so some of the information in this video may be inaccurate when the product is set to launch in a couple of years' time. But at numerous times during the conversation, the chip was referred to as Halo, almost like that was its name. I don't know if that's just the engineering or marketing code name for it or not though. I just found that whole thing interesting. We're long past the days of simply buying CPUs, or central processing units. What we buy today are SoCs, or SoCs, or a system on a chip. And we've known for some time that Intel are moving to a big little type of CPU. The upcoming bunch are going to be 816 configuration, that's 8 big cores, 16 little cores. And as you saw, Arrow Lake will be moving this to an 832 config. These atom cores are really small. I think Intel could be onto something with this. Yeah, that looks interesting to me. But basically this is what's coming next. It's a combination of the core cores and the smaller atom cores. And some of the SoCs will also include Intel's GT3 graphics, and of course other stuff like networking, IO engine, artificial intelligence even. But it's important to realise that all of these different elements on a chip are designed by different teams within Intel. And it's not just different teams, but different countries as well. That also includes America obviously, but also places like India, China and Israel. If you take a look at their open positions, there's manufacturing jobs Costa Rica, IP design verification engineer in India, and a SOC FPGA DFT engineering manager, that's in Malaysia. So all of these components are being designed, different teams, different parts of the world. And for a new chip to reach the marketplace today, it requires that every team is on the ball, as just one thing going wrong can hold up the entire project. But getting back to the Arrow Lake-p SoC itself, and it looks like a pretty enticing part, or at least today it certainly would be. Arrow Lake-p will be a 6 big core, 8 little core CPU, and the GT3 graphics die I was told will likely have up to a maximum of 320 EUs. Yep, 320 EUs in a mobile part, and I'll discuss that a bit later. Now regarding the CPU parts, the 6 big cores are indeed Lion Cove, which is the successor to Redwood Cove, which is the successor to Raptor Cove, which is the successor to Golden Cove, which Intel still hasn't released. And the Atom cores follow a similar pattern. And Skymont is indeed the codename for those. However, I was told that that may change before release. Intel are doing something different with Xeon here, and I have another different Atom codename that isn't any of these here at least. But I'll talk about that in a near future video instead. Now, given that we've recently seen leaks on Geekbench of Alder Lake-p, here we see Alder Lake, which is of course the part coming later this year, which also had the same 6 and 8 CPU configuration. And we know it's 6 and 8 because it's 14 cores, 20 threads. And the 6 big cores are hyper-threaded for 12, where the little cores aren't, so that's how you get to 20. So this could be a disappointment to many that Intel's Halo notebook chip coming couple of years later, shows no increase in core count. However, AdoredTV was also leaked on this roadmap over at Twitter with only a maximum of 96 EU GPU. And as you see, that also includes the P series. 320 EUs is clearly a huge step up on that, and we should expect a massive increase in graphics performance. But how are Intel hoping to achieve it? Well, I just mentioned how one thing going wrong can hold up the completion of a new CPU project. Obviously, the major issue with Intel these days is their woeful manufacturing arm, the manufacturing group, which was actually split into 3 recently. They have basically thrown away a 3 or 4 year lead on the entire industry, and they now lag by around 2 to 3 years instead. And all of that happened in around 7 or 8 years. It just doesn't matter how good your designs are if your process is backward, and definitely not when it comes to mobile. And so Intel's solution is they're going to go to 3 nanometers. Now, you may have read about their recent rebranding of nodes. 10 nanometers enhanced superfin was magically shrunk to 7 nanometers by the power of PowerPoint. And what was previously referred to as their own 7 nanometers, that one got an even more incredible boost to 4 nanometers. That is quite the progress there, Intel. A shrink the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. And after that we see Intel's 3 for 3 nanometers. But forget all about this, because arrowlake-p will not be designed for Intel 3 nanometers. Nope, instead the major constituents of the SoC, that is the CPU cores and the up to 320 GT3 EUs, will both be built for TSMC's 3 nanometer node. To be honest, I keep up to date with most tech stuff on Twitter these days, and it was about a month ago when Retired Engineer first tweeted about Intel and Apple buying up TSMC's early 3 nanometer wafer allocation. And the volume that was planned for Intel is more than that for Apple's iPad using the 3 nanometer process, one of the sources said. And it was actually back in January that DigiTimes broke this story. And so this arrowlake-p Halo would appear to be Intel's first 3 nanometer product at TSMC. They do have concerns about TSMC's ability to supply enough product, however. When I put it to them that 320 EUs must be quite a large die, even for 3 nanometers, they told me that, in fact, the GT3 graphics configuration had not yet been decided. However, 320 EUs is likely the maximum, based on what TSMC's yield and density will probably allow for at that stage of the process. If you recall, the newer the process, the worse the yield, but this can be mitigated by using very small dies. It's why AMD has had such a huge success with Zen. And when I asked how large a 3nm 320 EU graphics chip might be, I was given the answer of around 80 square millimeters, which lines up very nicely with AMD's Zen chiplets. This may also be why the Core and Atom cores remain at only 8+6 configuration. Basically, the die size is needed to remain as small as possible so early on the new 3nm process. And by this point, it was clear to me that Intel were going all in on graphics. I recall Apple doing a similar thing some years ago. I think this was the A9 or the A9X. Fewer cores, but they had a huge graphics portion on the chip, which really helped to set their tablet chips apart from the rest. But for Intel, and a jump to 320 EUs, if they reach that far, it really would be a huge step up in graphics performance. The discussion turned to why exactly Intel decided to lead on 3nm with this particular chip. And the answer was Apple. With arrowlake-p, Intel intends to take Apple's premium 14 and 16-inch designs head on. And in this case, with them moving to 3nm early, while Apple will still be using up wafers on their phone chips instead, Intel feels that they can get a win. But I put it to them that Apple's got other advantages. For example, the fact that they have full control over their MacBooks in terms of build quality. I was told that Intel will attempt to collaborate very closely with their OEMs. We already know that they are doing something similar with Project Athena, which is now named Evo. Intel been doing quite a bit of rebranding recently. That is with their ultra portables, and they work very closely with certain OEMs on that. So it shouldn't really be a particularly challenging step as they cuddle up to the OEMs as they try to get some really high quality laptops out there. But as the discussion was coming to the end, I still had one or two nagging doubts about arrowlake-p. A chip built specifically to take on Apple is a very bold and possibly very stupid move. And the fact that they will be doing it on TSMC's 3nm, which is basically Apple's backyard, that just helped to raise my scepticism. I could see though that Intel hopes that their big graphics portion, that's the one that they're going to try and make the differentiator. And it could work, especially if Apple are slow with their own 3nm M-class chip. But I simply asked them, why would I buy this over a MacBook? And there was some excitement as I was told that Intel has something special in the works. But all I got was the codename ADM. And I have been trying to find out what ADM means since that point. And yesterday, I finally got the answer from another source within the company. ADM appears to be extra cache memory for the GPU. And it may be stacked a bit like AMD's Vcache for the CPU, obviously. That's just speculation, but it's certainly the idea I got from everything I was told. And if this is true, then this could give Intel a really, really competitive graphics part. Those 320EUs are going to need all the bandwidth that they can get, and this would be one of the better ways to achieve it. Right, I'm done here. Just one last thing though. Alex has been asking questions on the channel, asking people if they'd like to see X, Y or Z videos. Far too many people have answered with, no, we only care about Jim, or Jim's analysis, or GTFO. Just stop doing that, please. If you don't want to watch the other guy's content, then you can click off at any time. It costs you nothing more than a click, and if that's too much, then you really should know by now what kind of videos I'm doing and what kind of videos the other guys are doing. So just don't click on it at all if you don't want to watch it. On the other hand, the more content that is on the channel, the better for the channel's algorithm, which is better for me, which means I'm more likely to continue making content. It's really that simple, guys. Now, as always, there is quite a bit more to talk about on this subject, and I've got roadmaps, of course, that I've been handed, but I cannot show those, not right now at least, for obvious reasons. I'll talk more about that and the analytical side of this arrowlake-p project on Patreon later this month. That's the kind of thing that may be important to investors and people with a vested interest in knowing what Plan B is if this all goes to hell in a handbasket. And make no mistake about it, it's an ambitious project with plenty of scope for going wrong. For the rest of you, I'll be back with yet more Intel leaks soon. And on top of that, I've been working on a far-reaching video series for Freethinker. I believe it's a really interesting series. But it's a little bit further out. These things tend to take me months to get to completion. But it's some interesting stuff that you might want to catch up on. I'll catch you later, guys.